Today I wanted to talk about Eurasian geopolitics and give you some background on where we are today and how it came to this Ukraine-Russian dispute that unfortunately has escalated and if we're not going to be careful, could potentially trigger World War III. So I hope you will not be bored. We're going to go back a little bit back in time, but I think after this video you will have a much better understanding. So Kitty and we are ready. I want to welcome you to Investors Reality. During the 8 years of the Bush Presidency, the role of Americans' military might underwent a radical transformation. The annual official Pentagon budget, including the Iraq and Afghanistan wars and their bloody aftermath, had exploded beyond all precedent. In the fiscal year 2001, before the declaration of the War on Terror influenced spending, the Pentagon had spent $333 billion on arms and manpower around the world to defend democracy, above all what was defined as America's national security interests. So by 2009, that annual sum had more than doubled when off-budget Iraq and Afghan costs were included. It came to $711 billion. Now, in comparison, the rest of the world spending on military, the sums spent by Washington were even more impressive. The United States was far and away the global leader in military spending. In 2008, it spent more than the next 45 highest spending countries in the world combined. Its Pentagon and related budget accounted for 48% of the world's total military spending. Almost one half of every military dollar. So compared with potential rivals, the US spent on its military almost 6 times more than China, 10 times more than Russia, and nearly 100 times more than Iran. China, with the world's second largest defense budget, spent $122 billion, or some 1/6 of the US spending. So when the combined military budgets of the United States and all its NATO allies, as well as key Pacific allies, Japan, South Korea, and Australia were totaled, the US-dominated alliance, they were spending annually more than $1.1 trillion on their militaries combined. So that represented 72% of the world's total military spending. Now, the extent of permanent US military bases over that 8-year period had expanded enormously from the Middle East to Central Asia to Afghanistan and Pakistan and across Africa. The Pentagon, they had deployed every weapon in its arsenal, from raw military conquest in Iraq to more soft power regime change into a pro-US dictatorship such as in Ukraine or the Republic of Georgia, and also in the oil-rich Caucasus region of the former Soviet Union in order to support a failed state, which we saw in Kosovo. So the strategic focus of that overwhelming US military buildup was the control of potential rivals on the Eurasian continent, now most directed at Russia and China. But let's look at Kosovo, because that is Washington's mafia state in the Balkans. So Washington's bizarre diplomatic recognition of the tiny breakaway province of Kosovo in the Balkans was very, let's say, indicative of their determination to use any and all means in order to extend their military reach into vital strategic areas of the globe after 2001. In early 2008, the tiny breakaway region of Kosovo, which was adjacent to Serbia, declared its independence. And President Bush, who was at the time on a visit in Tanzania, he did not lose any time in order to declare that the Kosovars, or the people there, they were now independent. Washington formally recognized Kosovo as an independent country soon afterward. Now, despite the objections of several European Union governments, it didn't seem to bother the US State Department that Kosovo independence and its recognition openly violated UN resolutions for Kosovo and made a farce of the entire UN rule of international law. The new Kosovo regime was headed by a man identified by Interpol as well as the German Secret Service as a criminal. He was a boss of Kosovo organized crime, responsible for drug running, extortion, and prostitution. Does sound like a fun fella to hang out with if you got nothing better to do, right? Prostitution on the right and a little bit of drug trade on the left. Now, this was also well known in Washington, but it didn't really seem to matter. You see, Kosovo, formerly part of Yugoslavia, then Serbia, was being made into a de facto NATO client state run by organized crime gang lord. So he was then prime minister, and his name is Hashim Thaçi. I hope I pronounced it correctly, otherwise he'd probably come and kill me. But anyway, in order to provide the US military unfettered control over the entire region, extending to the Middle East and the Balkans. He was only 39 years old at the time and had earlier been a personal protege of Clinton Secretary of State Madeleine Albright during the 1990s. So the so-called Kosovo Liberation Army, also known as KLA, was supported from the beginning by the US Defense Intelligence Agency and the British MI6 and also the German BND. So during the 1999 NATO war against Serbia, the KLA was directly supported by NATO. So the question then became, why were Washington, NATO and the EU and the German government so eager to legitimize the breakaway Kosovo? And the answer is not really hard to find. A Kosovo run internally by organized criminal networks was easy for NATO to control, and ensured a weak state that was far easier to bring under NATO domination. So immediately after the bombing of Serbia in 1999, the Pentagon had seized 1,000-acre large parcel of land in Kosovo at Ursevic, near the border to Macedonia, and awarded a contract to Halliburton, at that time Dick Cheney, he was the CEO, in order to build one of the largest US overseas military bases in the world, Camp Bondsteel, as it was noted earlier. And Camp Bondsteel was later revealed to be a site of alleged illegal CIA torture prisons. Now, Thaçi's dependence on US and NATO's, say, good mood, good graces, ensured, however, that the KLM government would do what it was told in matters of key foreign policy. And that assured the US a major military gain, consolidating its permanent presence in the strategically vital Southeast Europe. But it was a major step in consolidating NATO control of Eurasia, especially of Russia, and gave the US a large tilt towards its balance of power when it came to Europe. I guess it's no wonder that Moscow did not welcome the development, right? Kosovo was a part of a far larger and more dangerous Pentagon project, namely to militarize the greater Middle East, as the Pentagon has termed it themselves. So these actions, they were also instrumental in shaping the policies of the US Pentagon's hand-picked president of nearby Georgia. And now we are getting to Mikhail Saakashvili. So not just regarding membership in NATO, but also in provoking a military strike which threatened at the time to restart the Cold War, or even worse, in 2008. You see, Georgia, they actually had a very mad military play. In August 2008, after months of building tensions, Georgia's president Mikhail Saakashvili ordered an invasion of the breakaway province South Ossetia. Now, his decision was not a lone act. He had met with former Bush strategist Karl Rove in Ukraine 3 weeks prior to the invasion, and had frequent phone contact with the Republican presidential candidate John McCain, and obviously also met with the Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice in Tbilisi. So July 10th, 2008, one day after Rice had signed an agreement with the Czech Republic allowing the US to station advanced ballistic missile defense radars there, Rice, who is actually a Russian expert by background, reportedly backed Saakashvili's plan to launch the attack. However, publicly, she was claiming distance. So days after the war began, Saakashvili and his defense minister which is actually a dual citizen with an Israel passport and fluent in Hebrew. He told the press, much to the embarrassment of the Tel Aviv officials, that Georgia's military owed a debt to Israel for arming and training its forces, and that Israel, they should be proud of its military, which trained the Georgian soldiers. So Georgian Minister for Reintegration, Timur Yakubashvili, told Israel's army radio in Hebrew shortly after the fighting erupted, raising more than obviously a few concerns in the European diplomatic circus, you could almost say. So Israel, they had reportedly sold Georgia more than $200 million worth of equipment since 2000, including remotely piloted planes, rockets, night vision equipment, and other electronic systems, and training by former senior Israeli officers. Israel obviously claimed that it was not a major supplier of arms to Georgia, and insisting that the US and France, they were supplying Tbilisi with most of its weapons. Now Debka, which is an Israeli news service with reportedly close Mossad ties, they reported the following. Jerusalem owns a strong interest in Caspian oil and gas pipelines. In fact, they want them to reach to the Turkish terminal port of Ceyhan, rather than using the Russian network. So intense negotiations between Israel, Turkey, Georgia, Turkmenistan, and Azerbaijan for this pipeline to reach Turkey and hence to Israel's oil terminal at Ascalon and onto its Red Sea port of Eilat. Now from there, supertankers, they could then carry on the gas and oil to the Far East through the Indian Ocean. So it was all kind of depending on oil and gas. Now, obviously in this event, after Saakashvili came out and shared with the whole world that he was being sponsored by Israel, they then promptly announced suspension of all arms sales to Georgia, fearing, according to diplomatic sources, that Russia would retaliate by selling advanced anti-missile missiles to Iran. So months later, a special Ukrainian parliamentary commission of inquiry, they made an inquiry into allegations of illegal arms sales by Ukraine's pro-NATO president, Viktor Yushchenko. And the commission did find that the president was implicated in an illegal arms sales and fraudulent underreporting of it to Ukraine tax authorities. You see, Ukraine had actually in fact supplied weapons to Georgia even after the war with Russia had broken out. So Valery Konovaluk, who was head of the Ukrainian Parliamentary Ad Hoc Investigation Commission, stated to the press that the commission held documents confirming that Ukraine went on with its supplies of arms to Georgia, even after the conflict with Russia had started. He claimed certain documents indicated that ammunition and artillery guns disguised as humanitarian aid were shipped to Batumi September 22, 2008, long after the end of the conflict. The Ukraine Commission also found that there had been embezzlement of revenues from the arms sales, with large sums not reaching the state treasury and defense ministry accounts. So according to calculations, Ukraine sold $2 billion worth of arms over 3 years, while $840 million were officially declared. The rest presumably lined the pockets of Yushchenko and his dear good friends. So Washington's de facto client regimes in Ukraine and Georgia after 2004 were being exposed as ill-disguised gangster dictatorships posing as democracies. A form of totalitarian democracy in which laws were irrelevant when it hindered the goals of the US-backed Yushchenko in Ukraine or Saakashvili in the Republic of Georgia. As Washington was engaged in heating up the Balkans and Ukraine against Russia, it was simultaneously also upping the stakes against China in the developing war over oil and strategic raw materials taking place in especially Africa. Now I know this video was a little bit long and at certain points probably also boring, but it is always important to go a bit back in history. Usually we need to go much further back in history. Basically we can go all the way back to the to World War I, to the League of Nations. We can go up to see the rebuilding of Germany, preparing for Second World War, and then how NATO and the European Union has been then subsequently established. To me, it just seems to be a continuation for global dominance. But just by going back to 2000, where we were seeing that America and NATO, they were really, let's say, fighting for the independence and freedom of speech and democracy and all them goodies, but more or less using Kosovo, which is a very, very small, tiny place, as the first piece of this almost current political war or scenario where we are now. It always seems to be the same script, right? So first we saw the West trying to use Georgia with a president there, Saakashvili, backed by the West, and he was being actually provided with weapons by Ukraine and the West. And then when Saakashvili, because he was really too stupid for his own good, starting to really publicly sharing everybody what the plan was, then the West turned around, and as I have mentioned before, he is now in the hospital and almost in the crazy house. Why am I saying all this? I do believe that Zelensky is nothing else, even though, of course, Ukraine is much bigger client for the military industrial complex, and obviously it's also a bigger piece in the puzzle in order to achieve global dominance. However, I think that we are in a very interesting moment in time, because it does seem that somehow some smart people in the West didn't really think or believe or play out that we would see a counter coalition establishing themselves, which is the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, or the countries, or the BRIC countries. So we're really going to see, I think, a unipolar world. I hope we will see that. But yes, many things are unclear. But in case you made it so far, then thank you. And come join the live streams. I do provide some information about the future of finance, and I think it's pretty good in picking. And furthermore, we need to pay attention to the future of geopolitics. In case you enjoyed this video, it was boring, well, do me a favor, hit like, smash, and subscribe, give me a like, and all those goodies. That's it. Hope to see you soon. Stay strong, and don't forget, thinking can cause depression.